Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Spores of Wrath, a space colony exploration series by William C. Tracy, narrated by Cabral. A timeline of events: 5.77 megaseconds, 2 months, 2 weeks before landing. A fleet of 8 generational ships from Earth arrives in their 11th star system since beginning their journey. The system is categorized and named. The 4th planet, 11D, Lida, orbiting around 11, Lev, is determined to be conducive to life by Processor Alvin more than any other target so far. The 8 admins are revived from Sasani: Jane Brighton, Ahman Ragab, Dmitry Novikov, Shi Wanxing, Rajani Kumarasurijinder, Alessandro Giordano, Maria Gutierrez Delgado, and Polunu Kim. They all have gene mods from Earth that enable them to live for centuries. Vagal super soldiers re-engage the chain of command, causing conflict with the generational inhabitants of the fleet, who have been operating largely independently for 400 years. The soldiers will live almost as long as the admins, while the generationals live more standard-length human lives. There's a large amount of fungal biomass covering the planet, often to a depth of dozens of meters. Landing to 6 weeks after landing. The fleet glasses approximately a 10-kilometer diameter landing site near the equator of Lida. This is where they will begin constructing a city, labeled an Archopolis, from the ships of the fleet. Meanwhile, the biomass of Lida, which is itself sentient, watches the events with curiosity. It labels the glassed area as the Ring of Death and the settlers as the children who ate their parents, confusing the fleet ships for living beings. 13 days after landing, the catastrophic collapse of a ship skeleton leads to the loss of 23 Vagals and 58 generationals. It also opens a crack in the ground, leading to the discovery of a cavern under the glassed site still containing biomass material. It turns out to be deadly to the Vagals who investigate. One of them, Anderson, loses a hand to fungal infection. Further investigation leads Frank Silver, a generational, to the revelation that the biomass covering the planet is one individual entity, with expressions of animal, plant, and fungal cell material. It is not suspected to be sentient, merely very well adapted to living on Lida. 6 weeks to 1 year after landing. The biomass actively observes the humans who have landed, attempting to categorize them. Meanwhile, many of the colonists' animal species die from fungal infections. Plant species are changed by the biomass into unusable crops. The colonists heavily cull their agriculture to keep the most successful species alive. The admins try to kill the biomass with little success. They also determine there is a severe lack of metals on Lida, likely because much of them are within biomass structures. Admin Jane Brighton uses much of their remaining nanotanium metal to construct a wall encircling the first 2 radians of the colony, Alpha and Beta. The colony had been projected to take 10 years to complete all 8 radians. That timeline is now uncertain. One of the colonists, Zhao, meets a group unhappy about the direction admin is taking on the colony and wants to secure more supplies for the generationals. Agetha Xenakis is called to where her husband, David Xenakis, has fallen into a deep shaft under the colony, containing one of the only sources of metal found. While he recovers, he dreams of the moss and tiny creatures he landed on at the bottom of the cave. 7 months after landing, the decanting tubes begin growing children for the colony. Meanwhile, the admins determine they must find another source of building material for the next radians. 1 year to 5 years after landing. The biomass continues to attack the colony, while the generationals construct the Archopolis and the Vagals battle against biomass incursions. Frank discovers that the biomass has already hybridized with the local honeybees. Even worse, it is already intrinsic to the colony, and the best they can do is hope to live with it. While tensions mount between the generationals and the admins, Agetha and David welcome their new child, but their happiness is short-lived, as David collapses soon after. Doctors find his body has been overrun by fungal strands, and he succumbs soon after. Jiao also has a child by herself, though with genetic material donated by Frank. As the two children grow, and Agetha and Jiao help each other in child-rearing, Admin develops plans to limit the generational's influence in the Archopolis, while developing a new building material. Frank, along with some other scientists, develops resin plast, a byproduct of biomass material, as a new building product. Agetha leads a construction crew, but this affects her ability to raise Philippe, her child. Jiao takes up the slack with her child Chui, but Agatha's relationship with Philippe suffers. Jiao takes part in raids on the colony supplies, culminating in an attempt to steal rumored nuclear weapons. The rumors are false, and several generationals, Jiao excluded, are captured, and later they are forced out into the biomass. It is a death sentence. Anderson discovers a full life in the Archopolis where he begins to write stories, prompted by a mentor. The colony draws inward, reducing their ventures out into the biomass as Beta Radian is finally completed after 5 years. 5 years to 20 years after landing. The next generation of the colony is nicknamed Grounders. The admins, led by Jane, plan for when the generationals are all gone, gradually forcing them out into each newly completed radian, Gamma at 10 years, then Delta at 15, leaving the first radians for the admins and their vagal soldiers. As Chui and Philippe grow, they adapt to life in the colony. Many of the oldest generationals die off or sometimes just disappear, as admin secretly sends troublemakers out into the biomass. Anderson becomes an established writer, as well as leading vagal soldiers. There have been heavy casualties, and only a fraction of their number is left. Agatha's son leaves home as soon as he can to join a new grounder recruitment to shore up the number of vagals. Frank works on the resinplast formula. It is only a matter of time until the biomass adapts to it, as it has to every other attempt to keep it out of the colony. 18 years after landing, Dr. Beth Harley develops a mycophage to wipe out a large section of biomass. However, the resinplast has no resistance to it, and the mycophage would also destroy most of the city. Jane confiscates the original sample and makes certain Beth is pushed out of research and into a medical practice at the edge of the city. Finally, the biomass watches and observes. It takes in those admin has sent out into the biomass to try to understand how humans work. There are many failed attempts, but it learns more each time. 20 years to 40 years after landing. From 20 to 30 years after landing, the biomass is largely quiet, observing the children and accepting the people admin forces out. Epsilon Radian is completed, however the biomass has recolonized much of the glassed territory of Zeta, Eta, and Theta Radians, requiring flamethrowers and drastic antifungal measures. One of the first buildings in Epsilon collapses from an undiscovered invasion of biomass in its foundation, killing several construction workers. This is mirrored during construction of Zeta Radian, as a new type of fungal growth is encountered with explosive seed pods that activate in response to fire. Agetha forms a fast friendship with Beth, working as a doctor in Zeta Radian, eventually leading to love. During this time, the biomass fully absorbs the flowering reproduction of the plants brought by the colonists and starts an exponential expansion dubbed by Frank as the flowering. Displaced generationals band together with Agetha, Beth, and Frank to finish construction on Zeta Radian and deploy a modified version of Beth's mycophage, tailored only to target the new flowering component of the biomass. The mycophage is adapted for the walls of the Archopolis, leading to peaceful building and expansion. Agetha and Beth move to apartments Agetha personally built in Zeta. 40 years to 41 years after landing. Agetha, happily married to Beth, is in her early 60s. Once again, they are forced to move from Zeta to Eta Radian. Jiao walked out into the biomass 3 years prior, having terminal cancer. Her child, Chui, is now a scientific partner to Frank, making resinplast programmable using viruses taken from the biomass. These allow for buildings to grow themselves, requiring only individuals to tend them. Harry is one of these, teaching a new intern to look for defects. Julian, the third son of processor Alvin and Kophis, has always been prone to allergies and sickness, but lately has been losing time. He feels strange growths on his body, but forgets they're there soon after. Jane talks with the other admins of starting other arcopolises in the biomass. They will need to cross kilometers of uninhabitable terrain. With Julian as a starting vector, a flu-like sickness spreads across the colony, progressing into forgetfulness and lost time. Beth tries to study the disease, but ends up repeating the same test. Anderson, paying attention to his implant, named Cora, determines there is a pattern with those who are sick, but cannot find what it is. The printers making seeds to grow into new buildings are malfunctioning in very specific manners, reverting to native biomass. Chue eventually concludes there is an intelligence at work behind it, though Frank states that any intelligence on the biomass's part was disproved shortly after they landed. Chue sets up an information drop through Philippe, now working as a soldier under the Vagels, to provide anonymous information to admin about the possibility of sentience. Agetha has urges to wander and ends up at a strange house on the edge of Theta Radian, the last Radian still under construction. There, she meets Phyllis and a group of people who developed a dissociative sign language to get around their urges. They call what is causing the urges a writer. Anderson and Chue arrive at the Zeta Market for the predetermined information drop. However, Agetha, Beth, and Phyllis are there, as they sell vegetables and wares in the market. Julian is there too, having been directed by an urge. Agetha finds she can see through Julian's eyes and control him, though she is unable to process the emotional effect of doing so. As a team, they misdirect Chue and Anderson and steal the information, for reasons unknown. 41 years to 42 years after landing. The biomass is interested in the multiple communication codes being developed by the children, especially by those partially subsumed. They are strangely resistant. Agetha and Beth grow close to Phyllis, mentally and physically. They are tied together by the writer and can partially perceive each other mentally. They are also physically reverting to a younger age. Agetha strives to break through the fog in her mind, and over the intervening months, has a breakthrough. She asks for an equal footing with the intelligence invading them, the biomass. Anderson finds errors in new resinplast HUD systems, with figures deleted from his view and messages lost. Jane knows there was an intercepted attempt to provide information, but doesn't know by whom. She prepares for war, and pulls all admin and Vagels into Alpha and Beta Radians. Julian wanders outside the Arcopolis walls, unhurt in the native biomass. He meets generationals who were forced to leave the city years ago and were partially subsumed by the biomass. Semi-coherently, he opens the briefcase with the information from the market drop, which contains a programmable resinplast seed. With the help of others in a ramshackle camp between 5 giant fungal towers, he plants the seed. Agetha, Beth, and Phyllis soon arrive in the camp as well. Agetha discovers Zhao is alive and cured from cancer. She has been wandering the wilds in a fog, but is suddenly awake again, like the others. Chue develops a yes-no decision tree answer system to communicate with whoever is behind the resinplast printer changes. To their surprise, it offers deep and intelligent answers. Frank is finally convinced there may be an intelligence in the biomass. They call it Answerer. Jane receives the information anonymously from the information drop over a year ago, that the biomass is indeed sentient. The admins panic. Anderson hears snippets of information from all sides and, using Cora's intuitive leaps, also determines the biomass must be sentient. 42 years to 43 years after landing. The biomass had originally intended to subsume the children, but the recent cracks in its control are something it has never seen, making it extremely curious. Jane has closed the admin HUD system, communicating with paper or simple, unchangeable texts. She's developed Beth's original mycophage as a first-strike weapon and shoots it far out into the wilds, at the place she wants to build a new Arcopolis. It will get the biomass's attention as a bargaining point. They only have one chance before the biomass adapts to it, but as the admins watch, the test fails to clear what they expected. The biomass was already resistant to the mycophage and toying with them. Anderson decides to find out what the biomass is thinking and travels to the Theta Radian with Philippe. Chui happens to see Anderson and Philippe and follows. Chui instead runs into their mother, Jiao. They see the signs of the biomass on her and deny she is their mother any longer. Anderson and Philippe confront the small town outside the walls. Agetha quickly calls out her estranged son, Philippe. Anderson confirms they can talk to the biomass and, at the urging of Cora, asks to be put in contact. The biomass has never been able to subsume a Vagal or one of the admin because of their gene modifications. It agrees excitedly. Anderson is transformed over several weeks, and when he wakes, he can access more information about the biomass than the others. Chui pulls strings with Frank to call a meeting with admin. They show off Answerer. Jane asks it what it intends for them, and it prints a new human figure. Not admin, Vagal, generational, or grounder. Jane forms a cabal with Rajani, Ahman, and Wenqing to deal with the biomass. Since it wants to talk now, she's going to talk it into serving her, thus rendering it harmless. Part 1. Reset. 43 years after landing. 6 months, Jane Brighton said. And what have we accomplished? Nothing, besides skulking around like kids playing at being detectives. Answerer is being coy, and Dimitri is stirring up the other admins. Rajani Kumarasura straightened, her chin up. She led the scientific progress in the colony, and Jane had to call her to this dark and disused storage room by passing her notes like they were in grade school. Paper notes. Rajani had given her code of 2 taps, then 3. Ahman and Wenqing had different codes, to report on her progress. Jane had Christian choose a different place in the admin building for every meeting. Her assistant, and spouse, stood to one side of the room, making notes on paper. They couldn't use the HUDs because even the old-style HUDs from the fleet, now much repaired, were compromised by the biomass. The biomass that had shown itself to be an intelligent being in no uncertain terms. For over 40 years, Jane's concern had been finishing the colony, the Arcopolis. With this new revelation, she only cared about overcoming the biomass. What use was a city with a wall when the whole blasted planet could rise up against you? Rajani cleared her throat, repositioning her silk salwar kameez, though it didn't need it. I have Chui and Frank working every day on communications with Ansara. No one liked calling it the biomass, because that just rubbed their faces in the fact they'd been stupid enough to believe a world-spanning organism was a dumb animal for 40 years. But what does it say? Jane asked, one hand up like she was trying to grasp thin air. Rajani had to know what she meant. She'd been asking the same thing for 6 months. The key to the control of Answerer, the biomass, was understanding it. That was how you defeated your enemy, by understanding them. Straight out of The Art of War. Except they were trying to understand a sentient fungus. It's been reticent lately, Rajani sighed. Chui insists it has a personality, even a sense of humor, but it's been merely stating facts. It will give us whatever information we want, as long as we can decode what it means. Stringing us along, Jane said. It knows it controls the narrative. She waved a hand. Well, get whatever scientific knowledge you need from it. I'm sure it has recipes for materials and chemicals we can use. Specifically the composition of the fungal towers, if possible, Christian put in. They went back to writing. I'll do what I can, Rajani said, but it's got a completely different makeup, physical and mental, to us. It isn't even the right way to address Answerer. We're not sure if the biomass is a coherent entity or if the results we see are directly the result of our questions. I don't know if we can ever understand it. Keep trying, Jane growled. They talked for a while longer on other updates. Then Rajani left, and Jane and Christian began the dance they'd done once a week for the past 6 months. Find another abandoned place during the night in the huge and empty admin building, and talk to one of the 3 other admins, out of 8, that were in on this little cloak and dagger scheme. How do we talk to Answerer on the same level? Jane asked Ahman Ragab, who oversaw R&D, and was also a good sounding board. They were more philosophical than the rest of the admins. Find out what it doesn't have, they answered immediately. The issue is it can't think like we do. It has none of the same experiences. Jane gritted her teeth. She couldn't even complain Ahman had said the same thing as Rajani because she'd told each admin that it was just them, her and Christian and the other admin, on these nighttime meetings. So what do we know about it? Jane asked. What can Chue and Frank ask it that will press its buttons? Ahman looked thoughtful. We know it has desires, not just environmental urges. They rubbed at their chin with one hand. The question is, what is Answerer? Is it a gestalt of the biomass? Is it one subsection designed to interface with us while the rest of the planet goes about its business? How much of its total attention does it devote to the questions we ask it? Does it even represent the will of all of the biomass, or just one part of it? Well, that's a lot of nothing, Jane said, though Christian looked interested. Does it even have a concept of a whole, a self, like we do? It seems to have issues with individuality, as we've seen from the scientist's answers. That's not clearing up the issue. Ahman shrugged. You're the one who wants to get leverage over an alien intelligence. What would you do? Jane asked, genuinely interested in the answer. Get on its good side, then ask for resources, the other admin said. None of this trying to one-up it. But why not do both? Jane told Christian after Ahman had left. Christian tilted their head to one side. An interesting proposition, Jane, but do we get on its good side to then one-up it, or vice versa? Will it be more or less upset if it discovers what we're doing one way or the other? Does it even get angry in the same sense as us? Shi Wenqing, head of the Vagals and city defenses, was, as usual, much more direct than the other 2. We cannot hope to destroy the physical biomass. It is literally the whole planet. The shorter admin held up a finger. But it has demonstrated it has an intelligence. The question is, what part of it is intelligent? Jane started, hoping to jump over this line of reasoning again, but Wenqing waved a hand. Psst! Doesn't matter. Nor does it matter how it thinks. It's alien, sure, but it has base needs no matter how it thinks. All do. Animals, plants, fungus, what have you. Find a need and make it a trap. Decapitate the intelligence and the physical being is just a body to fight with no direction. Jane blinked. That almost made sense. But won't it die if the intelligence is gone? We do need its materials. Wenqing frowned. Why? This is a fungus. It's not supposed to think. Get rid of that part and you simply deal with a weird jungle. Jungle I can clear for you. Christian looked up from their notes. He has a good point, they said. 43 years, 1 month after landing. Chue fretted like a rat in a cage. Frank had to make calls for friends to care for his beehives. The 2 of them had been stuck in Alpha Radian since soon after they'd given the presentation confirming Answerer's sentience. Chue suspected it was Admin Brighton's lizard-like secretary who had trapped them here. Fortunately, the admins had arranged for all their equipment to be brought back from Zeta Radian, where they had moved it after Alpha and Beta Radian were closed to all but Vagals and admins. As far as Chue knew, they and Frank were the only 2 generationals and grounders in the 2 Radians. At least there's more bandwidth here, Chue grumbled as they tweaked tables of equivalencies. They were always finding subtle differences in what Answerer meant when it gave a response. The intelligence they'd contacted remained hard to understand. It communicated largely visually, having no concept of a language, writing, or even mathematical symbols. It was like trying to talk to someone only with dream imagery from the last night's sleep. "Not that Answerer cares about bandwidth," Frank said. He'd been grumpy lately, cut off from the projects he wanted to work on and forced to work only with Chui on communicating with Answerer. Fortunately, he'd completed the HUD upgrade program before they'd moved out of Alpha the first time, but Frank liked to jump from project to project, making incremental improvements in each one. "You could work on the programmable resin plast," Chui suggested, though that had also been their project, not Frank's. "With how much Answer has infiltrated our system, it's hardly worth studying. I'd just be learning what new changes it's making, not creating more myself. We haven't planted new buildings in Theta Radian for years now." Chui looked up at their mentor from the table they were adjusting. "We could ask it not to?" Frank tapped the table he was sitting at and thought. "Do you think that would work?" "I don't see why not. When it was interfering before, we didn't know it was intelligent and had no way of communicating with it." Chui began arranging equivalencies in his table for speaking with Answerer. It was a strange, slow process, using printed objects, weights of one object over another, and a hefty dash of artistic flair. They had guesses as to what Answerer meant by printing different objects, but continually had to refine and change the tables. Sometimes the meaning of objects would drift or change slightly, or sometimes Answerer would use objects in new ways, making Chui scramble to add new relations in the web of meanings they had collected. Frank knew how to get around in the database, but he didn't know all the connections Chui did. They'd also found that an object might change meanings depending on who asked the question and where they were. For all Answerer didn't have a good grasp of individuals versus a community, it had very nuanced answers. "Let's start with the symbols for growth and change." Chui collected a resin-plast printed figure of a sun and of a fungal spore. That wasn't exactly what they meant, but together the two objects made a better case for the question Chui tried to create. Often stacking meanings helped get the point across. "Now the object of what we're asking," they told Frank, who was looking over their shoulder. They added a printed programmable resin-plast seed. "We need a negation of intent in the question as well, and direction that we're talking about the biomass." Chui spared a glance at Frank. They had to tread carefully when referencing Answerer versus the biomass. Frank still held a bit of cognitive dissonance that the two were the same thing. They added the rejection symbol, the mushroom icon that represented the biomass, and a few other modifiers sprinkled in as a painter mixes colors to get to a specific shade of blue. "And now we wait," Frank said as a bank of resin-plast 3D printers started up. Answerer responded to questions almost instantaneously, sometimes before Chui had finished phrasing them, but the process of printing what it wanted to say, then decoding the answers, sometimes took hours. They still hadn't determined how Answerer knew what they were doing. Frank thought it was microscopic hyphal strands invading the entire colony. Chui thought it was the cloud of spores that hung over the entire planet. There was no way to avoid them, and there had been health fears when they first landed, but the spores seemed to cause no problem with respiratory, blood, or digestive systems. Knowing the biomass was intelligent, Chui had to wonder if that was a deliberate change on its part. Had they been dangerous when the fleet first landed? Answerer printed only one symbol, one of the simplest ones in the database, a symbol for confirmation. "Well, that was easy," Chui said. Frank blinked at them. "So, we can plant more programmable resin-plast seeds now? They won't be changed?" Chui shrugged. "Worth a try." They would have said more, but the lab door swung open to admit Admin Brighton's secretary first, taking in them and the room in a glance, followed by Admin Brighton herself. Chui's eyebrows rose. Usually, she just sent them messages. They hadn't actually seen her in several months. "I have something to ask Answerer," she said without any preamble. She gestured to her secretary, who flipped through a spiral-bound notebook, then showed a certain page to Chui wordlessly, their dead eyes boring into them. "You want to ask Answerer?" Admin Brighton held up a finger to stop Chui's words. Was she worried the biomass might hear them speak?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?